Okay, so today I'm going to be replacing my Dorman OPDA. This is in a 2005 Jeep Wrangler TJ. And so I'm getting ready to replace my Dorman OPDA because I've noticed that it's developed a lot of play in the shaft up and down. So the target wheel can actually move up and down a lot more than I think it should. And so I bought a crown unit to replace this one with, and I'm just getting ready to get the old OPDA lined up. So what I've done is I've taken the cover off already by removing the two screws on the sides right here and here. And now I'm setting my target wheel, so this small hole here lines up with this hole in the bottom of the housing, which is actually about right here. And so I've got to crank this OPDA around to get those holes lined up before I can get started pulling this one out. So I'm going to put a 3/4 inch socket on the main crank on the engine, and then just crank that thing around so that these holes line up. And what I started to do is I pulled the cover off, and then I actually turned the Jeep on and used the starter to get this close. So now it's within about 1/4 of its rotation over here to the hole that I have to line it up with, so I don't have to crank the engine over very far by hand. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so now I've rotated the engine around using a 3/4 inch socket on the main crank pulley from where the hole used to be. This hole here used to be down here. Now I've got it lined up with the hole in the housing, and you have to spend a lot of time getting this lined up just perfectly before you pull this out, or you're going to have to spend a lot of time getting it lined up afterwards. This job is really easy as long as you spend a lot of time getting this lined up. And once you get it lined up, the most important thing is that you never turn the engine over at all until the new one is in, and the new one is in this exact same position. The actual position of the housing doesn't really make any difference as long as that hole right there lines up with the hole in the housing underneath it. I'm trying to see if I can move this so you can see the hole in the housing underneath it. But spend a little time getting this thing really lined up. And here you can see how the Dorman unit has got maybe I don't know if you can really see the motion that this is doing, but it really has way too much play in it up and down. You'll get a little side-to-side play. This is pretty normal. But as I pull this up, I get even more rotational play as the whole shaft comes up and starts to disengage from the gear on the cam. So I'm actually a little worried that this Dorman unit could be eating my camshaft gear, but we'll see when we get it out. Right now I'm going to put a pin in it and make sure it's really lined up good. Then I'm going to remove the 13mm bolt that's underneath here and pull the thing out, and we'll see how it looks. Okay, so just one more shot before I pull this thing out of here. Just to validate that I had those holes lined up, I used the pin that came with my new OPDA and stuck it through the hole right here so you can see that the holes are lined up, and now it's rigidly held in place, and I feel pretty good about that alignment. I went ahead and removed the OEM sensor out of here, so you don't even have to mess with undoing the connector that holds this sensor on. You can just take the sensor out of the old OPDA because you're going to want to reuse your factory sensor, even though your new one came with a new sensor. Factory sensor is a little bit better. So now I'm going underneath it back here to pull out a 13mm bolt, and then we're going to remove the OPDA. Okay, so this is the clip that holds the OPDA on. It's just like the way distributors have been held on cars for decades. So I removed this clip, and now we're ready to pull the OPDA out. And it's going to have to rotate as we pull it out because I have the housing there. So you see about how much it rotates. Kind of keep an eye on this. It's almost parallel to the engine when it comes out. And now it's free and I can remove it out of here. And then there's also a little gasket at the bottom of the OPDA where it went into the housing that has either comes off or it might be stuck around the hole there. And if it is, just make sure you remove it before you install the new OPDA with its gasket. Okay, so things look pretty good because here's the gear teeth on the old OPDA. Now this one's only been in there for really maybe, I don't know, 8,000 miles or something along those lines. But it doesn't even really look like there's any wear on it, which is a great sign, which means my cam gear is also going to be in good shape. Just a little bit of tiny wear on some of these teeth here, but but overall I think they look pretty good. So here's the old OPDA after it's been removed out of the Jeep, and this is the problem that I didn't like. You can see how this whole gear down here at the bottom, the whole shaft moves up and down about 1/16 of an inch, and that actually can change because of this helical gear. That's why you have to rotate this housing as you pull it out of the Jeep, because of this helical gear, how it meshes with the cam drive gear. But it can actually change the position of the target wheel depending on how far up and down the shaft is riding, because it actually will spin a little bit as it's raising or lowering. So I didn't want it to fail, so that's what I did. I took this out and installed a new one. So here's the new OPDA installed in the Jeep, and I apologize because my phone ran out of storage space while I was doing the repair and I couldn't videotape it any longer. But if you remember right, when we pulled this OPDA out, I had to rotate this a little bit counterclockwise until this whole sensor holding part of the housing was like parallel with the engine. So with the target wheel locked into position, I started to drop this in with this parallel to the engine, and as it engages the cam drive gear, it spins around into the original position that it was in the Jeep before. So if you pay attention to what position it's in as it actually frees from the Jeep, you put it back in that same position, and then everything's all lined up. And I had the target wheel pinned through the housing with the little clip that is provided with your new OPDA. And then, of course, after it's all in place and you've bolted the clip down, and by the way, the clip is kind of hard to get in there. That's probably the hardest part of this job. And the only way you can really get it in is if you put the bolt through. If you remember the picture from earlier in the video, if you put the bolt back through the clip and then set the whole thing in there. Actually, what I find is after I've set this down in here and got in this position, I usually pull the pin out and I'll rotate the housing out of the way, put the clip in, get it started, get the bolt started. You set it down in there with the bolt through the clip into the threaded hole and get it started. And then I rotate this housing back in near position and repin it again so that it's now pinned again into the right orientation with the target wheel that's inside of here, and then snug that bolt down. And then that's probably the easiest way to get in here. Really, truly, the hardest part of this job is to get that clip back in there without dropping it and having to retrieve it. So it kind of helps to have a magnetic retrieval tool or a little grabber tool to pick it up for the times, maybe a couple times when you drop it down onto the floor, into the engine mount a little bit. So anyways, it's all done. I drove the Jeep here for about 10 miles today, and no check engine lights, so I definitely got it in place good enough that I'm not getting any codes. So I'm very happy with it. Now I've got a new Crown OPDA, and hopefully this will be the last time I have to get into this part of the Jeep in its lifetime. Good luck with your repair.